Welcome to our Expert Insight presentations here in Hall 11D72 at Formnext 2024. Today, our Expert Insights have been organized to dive deep into the focus of industrialization. We already had it here in our morning talks on stage, and our first presentation today is brought to you by Professor Dr. Jennifer Jones and Dr. Roman Bawinski. Professor Dr. Jennifer Jones, she's an interdisciplinary scholar working on several aspects of the additive manufacturing sector, including on resilient and sustainable supply chains and distributed manufacturing. I'm so happy to have you here. And Dr. Roman Bawinski, he's assistant professor in international business of University of Bristol. Roman is an expert in people's engagement with digital technologies within and beyond organizational boundaries. His current research focuses on the intersection of strategic leaders' decision-making and mergers and acquisitions. That's the time for mergers and acquisitions right now. Together they will present initial findings of an in-depth review of merger and acquisitions activities across the AM sector. And we're very happy to have you here and to put in the aspect mergers and acquisition together with the aspect of industrialization. And we are very happy to have you here, and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here again. I'm getting quite used to being on this stage every year. Normally I'm on my own, but today I've brought along my colleague from the University of Bristol Business School to talk to you about a project that we're working on together. And this is around merger and acquisitions in the AM sector. I'm quite conscious that I come here often and bring a business school perspective to a lot of aspects of AM, including around sustainability. But in this case, I wanted to take a closer look at the industrial change and dynamics that are happening in the sector. The bigger picture then, I think that it's typical when we're thinking about maturing industries to see levels of consolidation. We're used to having quite a lot of small specialist firms supporting us in industry, and as industry sectors mature, it is typical to see concentration through merger and acquisitions. What we intellectually are interested in is thinking about how that might be different at a particular moment in time. And at the moment, we feel like the dynamics of the contemporary global economy are changing to some degree some of the change dynamics we see across industry sectors. And I think that might be particularly acute when we look at additive manufacturing. So the global economy is witnessing a surge in nationalism, in protectionism and fragmentation. And this is likely to be exacerbated by the re-election of Trump as he favors more protectionist policies that then has a domino effect in the rest of the global economy. We also have other supply chain pressures that are impacting on the sector. This includes supply chain rupture and disruption due to factors like environmental interruptions, for example. Set alongside this, and this is where we would see maybe a point of difference in the contemporary economy, are politically driven strategies. And one of the reasons that we wanted to put together this project is to think more clearly and carefully about how that intersection of economy and politics helps drive each other, and the political narratives are having instrumental changes on all industry sectors. To the right-hand side of this slide, you'll see a case that I wanted to highlight that very much illustrates some of what we're talking about in this project. In September 2024, the UK government announced the acquisition of a semiconductor factory in the county of Durham. That's towards the northeast of England. It manufactures gallium arsenide semiconductors, and those are for military applications. The company was about to go bust, so the UK government has taken the very unusual step of acquiring this facility. And there's a very good reason for this. And it was the UK Defence Secretary who said semiconductors at the forefront of the technology we rely upon today and will be crucial in securing our military's capabilities for tomorrow. This acquisition is a clear signal that our government will back British defence production, will protect and grow our UK defence supply chain, supporting jobs and safeguarding crucial tech for our armed forces and boosting our national security. Now, this is a step change in the way that the UK government is talking about how it manufactures and where it sources the things, the critical assets it needs. Is, of course, an emphasis on the importance of defence, but I wanted to use this case study to really highlight for us these changing narratives that are coming from the political domain about the national economy. We know we have links to global supply chains, but the importance of being able to access things, critical resources and technologies within national boundaries, which is a change. So thinking then about consolidation in the AM sector, it is currently going through a new phase of consolidation. We have some of our initial data that Roman will talk to you about, showing the waves out of the change over time in terms of acquisition. So this has created the emergence of new global structures and a concentration of ownership. So on one level, we can track that and find some interesting observations, but part of our project is also thinking through some of the implications of this. If, for example, particular countries come to not dominate the manufacture of 3D printing machines, what might that mean for producers in other countries in terms of accessing that technology? We hear quite a lot of what I call chatter conversations around when I talk to those I know and beyond my own networks around what's happening in terms of consolidation. What we wanted to do to offer to the industry is to track some of this in a systematic way. I also raising this point about how do we access these resources, thinking about whether it may make some kind of hierarchy in terms of geopolitics and in terms of who our allies are, in terms of how and why we source the technologies we need. That may also have implications for time, for example, in terms of how we get the technologies and how they're delivered to us, and whether regulatory and trade barriers might prohibit some of this access. So then, our project at Bristol, I've summarised in some parts, but it's only 1-year project. It's first time we're working together, and it's going very well, I can say. And our key question really is how have these mergers and acquisitions reshaped the geographies and power relations within the 3D printing sector globally? Is this ongoing consolidation leading to the formation of hierarchies of access that could restrict access to critical technologies and components? I mean, there's a broader question for me that is around whether distributed manufacturing might be a way through some of these issues. But now, I'd with pleasure like to hand over to Roman, who's going to talk through. We would like to say at this point that this is the initial analysis of our data. There will be more coming, and we will come back next year with the more in-depth analysis as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Welcome everybody from my side, or hallo und willkommen. So, as Jennifer has announced, we've had this project looking into what the consolidation looks like in the A&M market. And what we've done as a first initial step is look at 3D printer manufacturers to see what is going on there. And just to bring you some recent acquisition examples that we've seen. So we've seen back in 2020, Stratasys is acquiring Origin. Then we've seen Desktop Metal acquiring Envision Tech for 300 million. So we've seen this wave of more and more acquisitions. And Nano Dimension is buying Global Inkjet. Nikon is also getting in, buying SLM Solutions. We're seeing Nexa 3D buying XYZ Printing, the SLS technology. And very recently, we've seen 2 announced acquisitions of Nano Dimension. So first of all, they've announced the acquisition of Desktop Metal, and then they've announced the acquisition of Markforged. Both of these deals have been announced, but they've not been seen through. We're going to expect them to come through either in this quarter or in the next quarter, starting 2025. And what is interesting here is before Nano Dimension has been taking over Desktop Metal, we've seen a lot of announcements and merger talk also between Nano Dimension trying to take over Stratasys trying to take over Desktop Metal for a bid for 1.2 billion. Now they've made the deal with Nano Dimensions for 120 million, so 10% of the original value. So there's a lot of dynamics in the markets. We've seen talks between 3D Systems and Stratasys about merging. So we're seeing this consolidation everywhere. A lot of the big players coming together, talking. So a lot of dynamics. And what our aim was to sort of understand what is going on here. So first of all, we took a look at what does the consolidation look at? How many deals have we seen in the last sort of 20 years? And so as you can see in this slide here, the number has been growing since 2010, peaking in 2021, where we've seen a lot of the major deals, and right now it looks like we're going to reach a stable plateau. So we've seen 9 deals already in this year. So we can clearly see a market consolidation. And what we're then interested in is which are the biggest acquirers, because we're interested in the geographies, who is actually buying in the market. And what we're seeing here, that we see 3D Systems is the biggest acquirer with 10 acquisitions over this time period. Stratasys, second business. Nano Dimensions coming in lately, as I've shown, quite a few deals. Player from Israel taking up a lot of the market, even buying Desktop Metal from the US. But what I really want to highlight here is that we're seeing all of these firms are in the US based or in Israel based, so the biggest player making the biggest acquisitions, they're sort of all from 2 specific countries, taking over large shares of the market. So what we then looked at next is a country overview of which firms from which countries have been sold, and what we see here is that the biggest chunk, or almost 50%, is coming from the US and Germany, with a big variety of other countries involved there, almost 25%. But when we look at who's actually buying, where are the buying countries coming from, we're seeing that the US is almost 50% of the buyers, so 50% of 3D printing manufacturers that have been bought from US-based companies. And the big sellers like Germany or the UK, which I want to highlight here because we are coming from the British Academy, we have a British perspective here, they're selling a lot, but they're not buying as much. And I want to dig a bit deeper into this. So when we think about this in terms of inflow of ownership of 3D printing manufacturing firms and outflow of them, we can see that the US is gaining, so more and more companies are located in the US, whereas countries like the UK, Germany are seeing serious outflows. I'm going to highlight this in a bit more detail here. So the US is gaining inflows, whereas Germany is losing almost 10 manufacturers that have been bought by other countries. The UK has sold 5, bought 1, so currently we have only 2 remaining manufacturers in the UK system. Whereas Israel is fairly stable, China also, but China is also quite a big black box on this one. So we've been struggling to find information about what is really going on in China. So this is something that we want to get in next. And then what we did next is sort of to map out where do we see like the majorities of 3D printing manufacturers. And what we can see here is that the biggest bulk, so the darker the color, the more 3D printer manufacturers we see in these countries. And what we're seeing here is that the US, and I didn't put the numbers, but it's about 43% of manufacturers are currently located in the US. The numbers in Europe, they are fairly stable within the EU, but what we're seeing is that in the UK, the numbers are dropping. So we only have these 2 manufacturers. One of them, Renishaw, is industrial. So if we're thinking about the narrative that we heard in the beginning about these becoming defense critical, and if we want to have sort of access to 3D printers as something that's very relevant for our supply chains, thinking from a UK perspective, there might only be 1 manufacturer, and they have been on the market, they were trying to sell, so this might become critical. As we can see in the map, I don't think you can see it highlighted here, but Israel is also becoming one of the big players. So we're seeing a centralization of power within the 3D printer market within the US and within Israel. And for us now, moving on from this, the next steps that we're going to take, or that we want to take, is really reach out to affected parties, to involved parties. So we would like to talk to you, to additive manufacturers, if you're suppliers, if you're customers. Is this something that you're worried about? Is this something that you're thinking about? Where will I be able to buy a 3D printing manufacturer? Where will I be able to get spare parts for this? Where will I be able to get materials? Is this something that is on your agenda? So if you would like to speak to us, we're always very keen to learn about your industry's perspective. This is like a high flyover level. And the next step that we also want to do is we want to extend the sample. We want to see what is happening beyond sort of the manufacturers. We want to see what's happening at the materials level, because materials can also become critical in the process of so the supply chain. We also want to get your input or understand what's happening in post-production or in 3D printing services. So what we're trying to do next is move beyond what is happening with just the 3D printing manufacturers to see what is happening in the supply chain, if we can see any bottlenecks, if we can really see that there are going to be hierarchies of access where coming from one country, we might not be able to get materials or access to spare parts or to printers at all. And this, from our perspective, might be especially relevant when we're thinking about industries such as national defense. So then, sort of closing is, I would like, as this is a research project, to reach out to you, to ask if you want to get involved with this, if you want to have a conversation with us. We are really curious to learn what the industry side, what you are thinking about these measures. So really, reach out to us, chat with us. I think this is a really, really interesting time to start thinking about what does national or global politics and sort of this consolidation, how do they work together, and how will they be affecting companies or the additive manufacturing sector in general. Okay, and I am done early, or we are done early, so thank you very much for your attention, and I'd really appreciate if you would reach out.
Yeah, a round of applause for these two.
We were.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Yeah, how does the centralization has effect on the user base? What is the effect? Is it a growing cost for materials and machines, or what do you expect?
I think when we think about different operations of manufacturing systems globally, I think that there's different pressures to change those manufacturing systems. So we do have highly centralized kind of global factories, if you like, in the global economy. But I think there's pressures to decentralize or have distributed models, in which case material supplies become really important. So I think the materials flows can be really important in this narrative in terms of where you can access those. But material resources, of course, are often fixed or in a small number of factories.
So I have to secure that I have a supply chain of the material I need when I start in a bigger project, for example.
Yeah.
So that's not as easy as in the past.
Yeah.
Although there are coming up new materials and the business is growing and the market is growing, that could be a problem in your...
Particularly with new materials, because of course they may be owned by one firm, for example, before they become broader, yes.
I see. And this morning we had the discussion about China. One colleague said he sees a very much growing business, AM business in China with more mature machines coming to Europe. To try to be sold here. Is it the same? You saw China was not as much dark highlighted as US, so there is a real big gap between these two.
There's a big information gap. So in terms of academics accessing data, there's a difficulty accessing data from China.
So the true data could be much more than you have access to.
It's a big problem, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. I tried to highlight this, that China at the moment, for us looking in as academics, is a bit of a black box. So there's some information out there, but we cannot get all the information. So this is something we'll try to look in and get access, but it is hard to come by because it's not as readily available as a lot of the Western data is.
Which is why we do the shout out to come and speak to people, because the data only tells you so much, doesn't it? And then you need to find out the rest of the story.
I hope all our viewers via LinkedIn stream, they will follow and have a lot of comments. I just checked, there were no comment I could see. But let me look into the future with you two. The re-election of Donald Trump, and he promised to strengthen the US economy. There could be much more money in the market there to enhance merger and acquisitions even more. Do you expect that, or do you expect that we are over the hill?
I think there's some question marks around. We know what Trump's intentions are of making America great and what mechanisms he intends to use to do that, and they can be things like trade tariffs and also boosting domestic industry. But we have his first presidency and we have data around that, and some of the initial analysis of that data is that some of his mechanisms to increase domestic production by mandating some companies had to have 20% US suppliers had the opposite of the intended effect and made America more reliant on global supply chains. So I think sometimes when you try and tinker with the global economy, it doesn't quite produce what you intended it to do so. But the bigger picture is still around national economies and thinking about national security. So I think that operates independent of Trump in a world that is more geopolitically unstable. I mean, we're looking at the UK, so of course there's dimensions around Brexit, so that's again complicating this picture, but a refocus on the national where we're used to thinking about EU level or regional or allies. I think it's, rethinking the national economy essentially.
And when you're talking to the community members, are they stating that they need a national program in Europe, in UK as well, or do they rely on their own strengths?
I think if you speak to somebody from the UK and you ask them about our industrial strategy, everyone will groan and moan and say, where is it? And we do have one now, but it looks very much like an old version of an industrial strategy. So I think we would look with some envy, particularly at Germany and thinking around Germany and EU strategies, looking at envy to the US even in terms of having strategies. So I think maybe it depends where you are, but I think most people would think that if there's strategic importance in particular sectors, the government needs to have at least an opinion on how they should be supported, and I think that will come.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me have one last question as a personal view. Had you already had the chance to go around and look at some booths or something, or did you arrive just this morning?
Just this morning.
Just this morning, and you had
Yes,
the chance to look around. And what was very impressive in your opinion? What was a product or a presentation you said, okay, you have to, for our audience, you have to watch this one?
I only arrived this morning, so I couldn't tell you that yet.
So you arrived too this morning.
Very much delayed out of UK, the flight
Yeah.
yesterday.
So then, I wish you a good time here and a little bit of time to walk around the halls and to get your impressions, and maybe you bring something home you never expected.
Yeah, we're both here still for the rest of the conference, so if you see us, please come and chat.
Yeah, perfect. So, and make sure to check our live stream, because there might be the one or the other comment to get in touch with you, because, you know, we are streaming all this on LinkedIn live stream, and there you can have your comments and see and make contact to these both. Thank you very much for having you.
Thank you.
And have a good time.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you. Goodbye. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, after a short break, a short commercial break, we will see some highlights there and a lot of pictures from the exhibition ground. We will have the next highlight here on stage as well. Peter Körte, he's a very new member of Siemens Managing Board. He will be with us and he will be sharing his views of his strategy and the Siemens strategy, especially in AM. And we are very curious about these, and make sure to zoom in then.